Hey, everybody, welcome to the Aligned Love Podcast. This is the place where I am going to help you find the one thing that you feel is missing: healthy love. I am your host, Lauren Zoller, and in this podcast, I will share with you how to attract love, live in alignment, and elevate your deepest relationships. So buckle up, get present, tune into your body, and open up to the possibility that you truly do get to have it all. Let's dive in. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the next episode of the Align Love podcast. Today, I have Annalie Howling on the show, and she is a highly qualified performance coach with over 20 years experience working with leaders in business, elite sports persons, and members of the armed forces, including ex-UK Special Forces. She specializes in transitional support, and through her unique approach is able to ensure that her clients overcome any self-imposed limitations to achieve their goals and move forward with confidence and a more fulfilling life. This is such a powerful episode. I have been following Annalie for a really long time now. And in this conversation, we talk all about eradicating shame and stepping into your most authentic voice, and also what it means to lead with integrity. So without further ado, let's jump right in and meet Annalie. Annalie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
I am so excited to have you here. I know that we are going to dive deep into integrity today. And before we even jump into anything that we're going to talk about, I always like to start the Align Love podcast with an intention setting. So I'm going to pass the mic over to you to see what's on your heart today that you would like to set as an intention for our chat together.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going through a big project at the moment. There's a lot coming up from me, a lot that I thought I dealt with. And so I'm kind of unpeeling layers if we're going to look at around integrity. So my intention is to be as vulnerable here with you as I can and stand in my own integrity, actually there in that vulnerability.
Love it so much. And I think that's such a vital point of integrity, which is what we're going to dive deep into, because I think that a lot of people, well, it is and it isn't. Sometimes people will use vulnerability as a way to bypass integrity, I think, which we'll talk about a little bit more. But before we do, in case this is their first time listening to you and being in your field and experiencing you, talk to us. Tell me a little bit about your story. I have been following you for a while now, and I love that you dive deep into trauma. I'm a trauma geek myself, but I want to hear a little bit more about your story and how you created this beautiful platform that you now have for a lot of people.
Thank you so much. And thank you for that beautiful introduction. So yeah, Annalie Howling, me and my little daughter say howling at the moon. Ow! And like we're recording this on full moon. So it's perfect. My sort of journey was, I had a very violent childhood growing up. So I was very unsafe with both of my caregivers. My father was violent, my mother colluded. So they were in it together, shall we say, which then as the child, you're outside of that dynamic, but they are your family. And of course, you can't get your basic needs met. They're the perpetrators and your caregivers. So it's a very confusing, very conflicting push-pull. I think that sort of kick-started hyper-independence and other behaviors. And then I find myself going into the workplace, doing very well. I've got an MBA. I've got all these sort of things and medals, like I call them, typical type A, which led to a fairly catastrophic burnout before my 30th birthday. I'm coming up for 43 now. And that sort of led to me really, the universe served me my own ass on a plate, to be honest. I've been trying to ignore the things that I needed to deal with. And as I think probably all of your listenership knows, and I see you nodding, we can keep sticking band-aids on it, but at some point you're going to be pulled to the floor and shown, Pandora's box is tipped out, and it's like, you're going to deal with this right now. And I asked you to do it before, and now I'm going to pull you onto the floor and you're going to do it on your knees. So I did. And one of the first steps was having a coaching session with a really dear friend of mine. And she did a guided visualization, which was something I'd never experienced before. And I kind of relate it now to that kind of gooey feeling at the end of a yoga class, like a bit of shavasana. But I hadn't really tapped into spirituality or just even that part of my brain, like the subconscious. And that took me there. And it took me there in a way I hadn't ever been before. So I then wanted to understand all about this amazing coaching practice. It was quite unknown then. You know, Wendy Rhodes hadn't been doing her kinky thing in billions. It was all a bit weird and woo. This is like 14 years ago now. So I took myself up to the States, West Coast, did all my studying in San Fran, lived there on and off for quite a few months, because I still wanted to collect the medals and the certificates and do all the certifications, which I have. I've got every qualification you could possibly imagine and more. And I brought it back to practice to kind of change my life as well.
I love it so much. And it's what I love hearing about that is that your own story is what led you here, which for all of us, I think that's what happens. It's like at some point we don't listen to the little whisper. We end up, like you said, on our knees, and we have no other option but to go into the work, because staring us in the face and we can't function.
Yeah, totally. I use this example a lot that, you know, I was doing everything except dealing with this. And the same can be said when my marriage broke down. You know, I was looking for anything to save my sort of setup that I had when I was burning out. And I was looking for anything that in my marriage when that was falling apart, rather than face the reality of the situation.
Yeah. Yeah. So I know that we're going to talk about integrity today. That's kind of our main topic that we're going to dive into, but I'm curious, even when that was happening in your life, when you felt like you were on your knees, you were going through this massive shift and change, you decided that you were going to learn more and absorb more. What was your relationship like with integrity then? And how has it shifted now to where you are?
That's a really beautiful question. Thank you. So my relationship with my integrity then was broken, I would say. I had learned, and it relates to vulnerability, the sort of intention at the beginning of the session. I had learned to put armor on myself and never be vulnerable. You know, violent childhood, protect yourself. My first job, my industry was construction and property, so very male, very toxic male. And I'm not saying it's easy for the guys. It's a toxic, or was a toxic industry way before Me Too, you know. And so I armored up. I layered up. I would never cry at work. I would repress my femininity. I would never show vulnerability. I'd try to be one of the lads, you know, and I would do that in every dynamic, not just at work. I would do that with friends. I would never really say how I was. I wasn't really showing up in any of my relationships. So honestly, that burnout, part of it was going, you need to start being vulnerable. And the first step of that for me was asking for help. I never asked for help. I didn't know how. I felt, you know, it wasn't even that I felt weak doing it. I was hanging on by a thread, and you know, you think you're doing okay. You're like, oh, no one knows I'm struggling. I've got this down. Like everyone thinks I'm doing brilliantly. And the reality is like bits and pieces of you are falling off, you know. And so that for me, my integrity was probably in tatters, actually, not intentionally, not Machiavelli, but I was trying to do what I could to survive. I now understand that my sort of type A racing through life towards burnout was also in response to the trauma I'd experienced in my childhood. I was trying to outrun it, make myself financially secure, so I never had to go back to that environment. I understand all of that now, and I have a lot of compassion for that version of myself that I was then. But at that moment, it was in the pieces that I was raking through on the floor. And where is it now? I would say I don't want to sound flippant for anyone that is in any kind of recovery, but for me, I kind of have to approach it as the vulnerability piece with my integrity, to make sure that I'm consciously standing in there, because it's still probably more comfortable for me to be a bit closed, a bit more my masculine, if I was to say that, a bit more. I have got Scorpio rising, so you know, like it's a kind of, I would sort of say that kind of lean into that, but yeah, I have to remind myself sometimes to stay open, not to close.
Which I think is such an important part of integrity, that, you know, what I see in the world, and I feel like the word integrity is thrown around a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I have seen it even, you know, in my practice with women who date men who say, you know, I'm a man of integrity. I'm integrous. But then they are not men of integrity, right? And so I think that there is so much, what you said is really important, that there is that continual commitment to standing in your vulnerability and knowing it's actually easier for me right now to armor up. Mm-hmm. And I think that the knowing of it's easier for me to armor up, but I'm going to choose vulnerability. That's integrity. It's the choice
of saying, I know that this is my pattern. This is what feels familiar to me. I'm actively working to shift that. And to me, and I don't know, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. It's that choice of saying, yeah, but I'm not going to. And that keeps me in integrity.
Totally. My favorite description and way of telling if on somebody's integrity, what their integrity is, it's what they consistently do. That is someone's integrity. So if somebody is consistently telling you stuff and not doing it, that is their integrity. Like, they have none, you know, so their integrity is they have none. So if somebody is, whatever they are consistent with, and the critical thing, sadly, being you have to watch what someone does. You don't listen to what they say. That is the measure of someone's integrity. So actually, the beautiful thing is we always have the data available, if you like, to assess someone's integrity. Obviously, early dating, when we're data gathering, as I say to my friends and in my own experiences, you're getting that information, but you are able to see patterns fairly soon, and it's the consistency of what someone's doing. They're showing you their integrity, they're showing you who they are. And yes, absolutely, for me, it's trying to make those choices that make me feel good about myself. Like my the clearest conscience is going to bed at night on the softest pillow is your clear conscience, and I love that for myself. So yeah, that's why I try and make those choices.
Yeah, that's big. And how do you suggest, and how do you lead someone through, because a lack of integrity to me is a survival response. We've talked about this, right? It is that sense of feeling like it's not actually safe to show up and be vulnerable and actually be a woman or a man of my word, because in the past, it wasn't safe for me to do that. I had to armor up in order to be accepted, in order to feel loved. Where do you guide people in taking that first step and starting to reclaim integrity, or even step into it probably for the first time in their entire life if they never felt it before?
Yeah, that's amazing. So there's kind of two things here. And as women, we have, I'm being generalistic, more capacity for empathy. So we are more likely to say, oh, but they had this thing happen to them. And, to your point, like, I had all this stuff happen to me, and, I was really struggling with vulnerability, and I'm trying to make it work. And potentially I was a bit of an asshole then, like, today, but you could be like, well, she's really trying her best. And, she's had all this bad stuff happen to her. And so there's a kind of, we have this beautiful capacity for empathy and love, and seeing the light in somebody. So that is true. And then, as well as like I say, the sort of measure of actually seeing what is real, not what we're projecting onto someone. Because as I think I've seen you speak about, we have this, again, beautiful inner light where we can see the potential, and we know how we would treat another person, so we can project that on. So we have these beautiful capacities to project kind of the good onto people and possibility. And again, that can give permission to someone not to be in their integrity, because you're kind of doing it for them, or like painting around the extra bits for them. So I think that the first step, the thing that I think, and I'm doing a huge piece of work at the moment, and I'll be able to say more about that and share it with your audience in a couple of months' time. It's massive, and this is where it's sort of been leading me to these big revelations around shame. And shame is the macabre master of misery that sits so deeply within us. And shame's actually very, very hard to put into words. Shame is a felt sense. It's an I am. I've given this example before, but I'm a single mother to a young daughter. And if I said to you, oh, babe, do you know what? Bit of a rush for school this morning. It wasn't our best effort. Don't think I did my best job. That's me being a bit guilty. If I said, oh, I didn't feel like I did well today, it wasn't great mumming, you'd be like, oh, yeah. If I said to you, oh, darling, like, absolute shocker this morning, we were late and this and that, I am a bad mother. Genuinely, I feel physically unwell saying that, and I'm making up that example. Now, there are things that all of us feel ashamed of. There are things that all of us have an I am. I have people in my office every single day. I am broken. I'm unlovable. I'm out of control. I'm a failure. I'm unsafe. Now, we have that limiting inner belief that shame, if you like, is the custodian of, and it's living so deep, usually in your gut, that pit of your stomach. Then you have your inner critic, which is sort of your patrol guard going, oh God, shame's horrible and disgusting. We don't want anyone to see our shame. So if anyone sees our shame, we'll be rejected for sure. So what we should do is we should be really perfect. You know, that's kind of maybe a little bit more female, but I think it works with men as well. So this is where imposter syndrome comes in. This is where we start, again, using image that might not be in line with our integrity. And this is where it becomes tricky. Am I being Machiavellian, purposefully leading you away from something that I don't want you to see in a like a deceitful way, duplicitous way? Or am I trying to lead you away from something that I feel ashamed of because it's a part of me that I find unlovable, that I need to bring into the light? But it's shame that lives underneath it for all of us. That's the sort of thing that we need to start bringing out and looking at. And a first step for people listening, great news, everybody, great news. You can cure shame. You can, it's true. Slightly tricky caveat. The way to cure shame, the only way to cure shame is self-compassion. And it is so much easier to give compassion to another. Hence the looking at someone and their broken parts and going, I can love you better. I can fix you. Rather than thinking like I can do it for me.
Yeah. Yeah. So big, so big. And so I work in somatic experiencing and somatic therapy. And we always talk about shame is the stickiest emotion that there is. When you move through something, get ready for shame to come up and stick to something else that you move through. And I think that that is what you are. And I truly believe that shame is underneath everything. I mean, it really deeply is the core of every issue that shows up in my practice too. Shame is the core of it. And so I love you're bringing that to light and understanding that when we're looking at integrity, and I believe that when you are in conversation or you are with someone who claims to be of integrity, it is someone who has looked at that part of themselves and said, where am I holding on to shame in relationship to things that have happened in the past and in relationship to things that I haven't healed? Where am I not showing up and or projecting things onto you that I feel like I need to project in order to keep this facade of who I am, which is really, really big. So where do people start? I know that shame, before I started working with it in my own personal practice, showed up as this really nasty inner critic. I was there, that I constantly felt like I was trying to silence it all the time, and I couldn't. For me, the somatic work got to the root of it. But I'm curious if someone is listening and they're like, okay, I'm starting to resonate with this. How can they begin noticing that shame really is running their life and it's something that they need to start to look at?
Oh, thank you so much for that explanation. Yeah, the body, as we both know, keeps the score, and the body, if you are feeling a bit overrun by shame, getting into your body is the only way to get out of your head. So how could you start? Well, one of the things to do is, like you say, if it's resonating, and the other thing that you can often tell if you're being run by shame is you are a chronic people pleaser. So your life is run by the great big list of shoulds. Oh, I should do this. I should be there for them. I should say yes to that invite. I should do this. I should bake this thing. I'll offer to do the thing for the class. I must do this thing. I should. And in my opinion, should is a swear word, because we have this great big pile of shoulds, and that is not usually aligned with what we want for ourselves. Shoulds, generally speaking, are for others in some sense. Societal shoulds, there's a lot of societal shoulds, especially for women, about how we should be and should not. And I think the others are for other people to, supposedly keeps connected. So have a look at how often you should yourself, is the first way I would say, because if shame's got controls, got the steering wheel, you're shoulding yourself a lot. And then even make a list of it. It's quite a good thing on your iPhone to make a list of you've got a to-do list. Have a look at your should list and then go through that. And you can start by stripping the engine back and saying, actually, of all of these, which ones do I want? Not because someone might feel bad or I said yes, what do I want? So start there. And if you're another way of reframing this, because sometimes I found through doing a lot of this work, when you're saying, what do you want? And I'm quite body focused now as well. If I can't get to what I want, because that's still mind chattery, I think, what would give me the most pleasure in this situation? And it might be, I need to take a bath. I need to go on a long walk. I need to have a glass of wine with a really good friend of mine and cackle. You know, like, what is it that is going to connect me into what I would call pleasure, which is a peaceful pleasure, very soft, peaceful state, you know, having a sip of coffee in the sunshine with no phone, no distraction. That's a pleasurable, pockets of pleasure. How can I cultivate some of that? Shame also is, again, you all know, you and I are speaking quite openly about big topics. I just wrote my newsletter, which will go out next week. And I've just written something I've never talked about before, about going on the first holiday with my daughter when I'd just broken up with my husband, and she was 3.5, and I flew 12 hours to a luxurious, effectively, like, you know, you couldn't be in a more paradoxical environment, right? Everyone's in a couple or a family. It's Christmas and New Year. There's me with her wearing her Cinderella blue dress on the beach at 3.5, just me and her. And the pitiful looks, I heard, poor girl, you know, people looking at me, and actually there were tables of people not speaking to one another at all, pitying me, you know. And it was a difficult time, but equally she and I've still got some brilliant memories from that moment. So, and I would say doing something like that really helped me get off quite a lot of that shame, because there was nothing wrong with not being a wife anymore, and there's nothing wrong with it just being me and her. And 5 years down the line, I'm about to go away with her on holiday on Sunday. We've done tons of trips since then, and both of us relish it. So something you feel that might be shameful, or you'd be ashamed of, or you'd be judged for, like, get underneath that and have a listen to, again, is that because you think you should be doing something else, or what do you want? And then the other step, as I say, self-compassion. Now, like, I'm saying this not being flippant. We find it so much easier to give compassion to others. So that can be useful in this exercise. Let's just say you've got an experience from childhood, which most of us have, that we feel very ashamed about. There's a lot of shame in our system. Now, if you can connect with your inner child, if you've done that work, and you can put them in the scenario and run the scene through, brilliant. If you can't connect with your inner child, and again, we often find it harder because it's us, you know, put your child in, your niece or nephew, a friend's kid that you really, really like. Put them in that scenario, run the exact set of circumstances again, and you tell me if that child had any choice, knew better, could do something differently in that situation. And the first thing is, well, of course not. My father, there was a memory that haunted me. He punched me in the face in a restaurant when I was 7 years old. Nose bled, went everywhere. And I believed for years I made him do it, because he told me, you know, I was bad. I made him do it. I was rude. I mean, all of these things. And inside me, I knew that wasn't quite right. My integrity probably telling me this isn't quite right here, but equally, what can I do? And this is at a time there are no mobile phones. I mean, what am I going to do? I can't get out there. My daughter is that age. She's 7 years old. And I've had this memory worked on with EMDR, so I can now be with it very easily, and it's released from my system. But when we first, with my own therapist, started looking at this work, I couldn't even bear to have her sat in the chair, let alone anything else happen to her. It would never be her fault. So that is an exercise for somebody, if they're struggling to work on their own bank account of self-compassion, would be, as I say, to bring somebody else in that they care about deeply, and you'll probably feel a very different response doing it that way.
So big. And there's so many points in there. I feel like we could have a whole nother podcast on so many of those points that you just brought up. It's something that I want to talk to both the self-compassion piece, and then also the shoulding, because that is such a powerful exercise. The should exercise. I did something very similar in my path. And it was so crazy, Annalie, because when I did it and I started to look at, what am I doing that I don't really want to be doing? To the end of the list, and there was nothing on the list anymore.
Yeah.
And then I had this realization of, oh shit, who am I?
Yeah.
What do I even like? What do I want? And I feel like that in and of itself is a whole nother awakening when you start to do that type of exercise, because, and I grew up in a chronic people-pleasing household. I mean, my poor mother is still that way. God love her. She's working actively on it. But it was the only thing that I knew in the family of origin that I grew up in, is how to shut down your own needs to be accepted and to be loved by someone else, to validate your worth and to validate who you were. So I think that if you're listening, that is such a powerful exercise, because it gets you to the root of, who are you? And what do you even like? I didn't even know what I liked. I didn't know that I liked baths. I didn't know that I liked to sit down and read. I didn't know that I liked to go to dance class on Thursday nights. I didn't know those things because I was living my life so ingrained in what I wanted everyone else to think of me, which is crazy.
I love what you've just said there. And there was something that you said about the love piece. And I do think women in particular, you know, our parents, to say, you know, I maybe didn't have the best option, but you know, I wouldn't change anything. My life is fantastic. But most of us do grow up from society and other things, you know, oh, there's a good girl, or, you know, all of these sorts of things. And so we do learn to receive and be validated in love by things that we have done for others, in service of others. So there is this huge disconnect very often with, you know, the idea. And with my clients, sometimes we work on, you know, if you're here just now, right as you are, haven't had a wax, you know, I didn't with you, my hair's not perfect, you know, whatever it might be, do you feel worthy of unconditional love? I know that can be a bit of a discussion point, but let's for now, we'll play with it. Or, well, you know, can you just receive without earning it first, in inverted commas? You know, I often joke about, like, oh, I didn't clean the house properly. I haven't, like I say, I'm not wearing my, you know, Miss Thing outfit, and you know, everything's not perfect. And it's like, no. Like, there's this misconception that in some way we must be perfect, or that we must have done things first for another, or we must have created incredible environments and been this marvelous hostess, because somewhere service got mixed up with love. And that's where there's also, I think, a big disconnect, is really this focusing on ourselves to make sure that we're comfortable with our parts, that however you stand, you're like, yeah, I'm worthy of unconditional love. Damn right I am. You know, even with the dry shampoo and not having a wax or whatever it might be, like, still worthy. Dishwasher's not done, whatever it might be, still worthy.
Yeah. Well, and I think that it comes full circle back to integrity too, because there's no way that you can be in integrity when you're spending your life trying to please other people and completely disregarding yourself.
Yeah.
And I always say that every time that you say no, when you really want to say no, you're saying yes to yourself. And I think that that's a really big lesson of what that exercise gives you permission to do. It's like, where are you? Because when you're shooting all over the place, all you're doing is you're not stepping into integrity.
Completely. Yeah, completely. It's actually a really helpful, as I know, you know, it's like a really helpful for someone starting out, if they this happens to be the first one they're listening to, or they're just starting out about this subject. Great way that you know if you're not listening to yourself is if shoulds in there. That's the inner critic. That's how you know immediately you've slipped into radio inner critic, as I call it. Like, you're driving along and you're like, oh God, and then you're like, how long have I been listening to this for? I thought I was listening to like a happy, you know, having a nice day, and then suddenly it's like, oh, you should have done this, you should have done that. You're like, oh. But great news, use it as information. Use it as information, be curious and go, okay, cool. I'm clearly shoulding, means it's my inner critic, means it's not me. Good. What maybe was I doing before? Potentially, who was I just having a conversation with? Is there a pattern? Is there an environment, a food? Is there a person? Is there something that is sending me, you know, more likely into this space? And then, like you say, start using your no's and use them wisely and freely.
Yeah. Well, and I think your story resonated with me so deeply. And circling back to what you just spoke about, having that moment when you left your marriage and your daughter was 3, and you were in this space of people looking at you and judging you for who you were. I am 36 years old. I am single. I've never been married. I have no children. And I was in a situation a few months ago where I was very close to it, and I honored myself and said, this is not it for me. I have to go, even though that dream was so big. And I think that a lot of the women that listen to this podcast, they're struggling with that, the timeline of, I should be married by now. I should be a mother by now. I should not have divorced the man that I was married to for 10 years to follow my heart. I should. And so I just think that this conversation, for every woman that's listening, gives so much permission to fuck the timeline. Like, let go of the timeline and start to look at what's underneath the timeline, and who are you underneath all of the shoulds, and really reconnecting to who are you at an integrous level, like really deep down in your soul, underneath all of this shame, start to do some of that work, because that's the work that's really going to bring you to life and have you step into the magnetic life that you really want for yourself.
Completely. I mean, my benchmark changed from this experience because I chose myself, and so did you. You know, and I probably spent a life of maybe thinking I was doing that, but I think I was choosing shoulding. You know, I think I was maybe shoulding for other people, and certain things look good on paper, and all that stuff. And you know, genuinely, I literally did just write this newsletter. You know, I'm about to turn 43 in 6 weeks. I have never been happier. I've never looked better. I've never had more energy. I've never been more aligned, in more alignment in my life. I've never had a better relationship, romantic relationship. And it's taken 5 years, right? You know, so, but I needed to do that because I would have settled for scraps if I didn't. I would have done. And a few things, like the rug got pulled. I'm going to be really honest, like the rug got pulled a few times, and you think, why me? Why again? Why now? Why is this happening? I can't take any more. Oh my God. Like, and the universe had a habit of like serving it to you a few times in seemingly in one, you know, like financial, romantic, something else. You're like, oh my God, what more? But actually I could take it. I could take it all. And I showed up for myself and my daughter in a way that I didn't know I had in me. And you know, I'm a really lovely person. I'm very caring. I'm very nurturing. But you know, there's also a part of me now. I know my power, and there's something really exciting in that, because I don't think I believed that before. You know, I think I maybe believed I needed the security, perhaps, of relationship, or even other things like security of job. It doesn't need to be a romantic relationship, security of big corporate, security of whatever, a certain place you've always lived. Like, people are thinking about making changes in loads of different ways. You know, how can I leave the industry I've always worked in? How can I leave the town I've always lived in, or the country, and without a plan? But the reality is you can, and it's one step at a time, which sounds cliche, but it's just true. You don't need to know more than that. You need to know that the next step ahead, you're okay, and you know, the universe will light the rest of the way for you. But to speak to people that might be listening, because this is where I was, and it sounds similar, and I'd love for you to share more perhaps about this, is if you're happy to. I have never been more anxious in my life. I've never been more unhappy than the months before I made the decision. Now, when I made it, yes, there was still shitty stuff to deal with, right? Still, stuff was a bit tough, but my God, the weight of the anxiety, the constant racing thoughts, how out of control I felt, you know, behaviors. I used to self-harm. I used to scratch my face. I didn't know I was doing it, which is absolutely sounds insane. I'm writing a lot about it at the moment. But I used to be doing that as a way to discharge stress. I used to do it in the show. I used to come round with blood running down my fingers, because it was the shower's only safe place, in inverted commas, that I could go. And that was my silent scream that I was clawing out of my own skin. And that was the only way I could let out what I needed to do. So to say to anybody listening, people are like, you're so brave. And I said, I just didn't have a choice. I couldn't do that anymore. I was so out of alignment. I couldn't do that anymore. And again, I just want to reassure people, yeah, sure, there have been challenges and roadblocks, but I have never felt like that since. Never since.
And I resonate so deeply with that, because that is exactly what I experienced. And you know, my heart hurts for women who, because I see a lot of them, they come to me after the fact, but my heart hurts for the women who have felt that, because you're right. There is absolutely no anxiety in the world that I have ever felt like I felt before I left and before I honored. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't eating. My business was plummeting. It was just everything that you could ever imagine. It was chronic anxiety all the time. And I remember the guy that I was dating was like, what is wrong with you? Why are you so depressed all the time? But it was because I was in this state where I knew something needed to shift, and I knew I needed to honor myself. And I know that there are women listening who have been in that space time and time again, and they just continue to quiet it. They continue to settle. They continue to not listen to the voice. And so I think hearing it, and also me validating too, that I had the exact same experience. The moment leading up to making that decision, those were the hardest months of my life. And it's not that once you make the decision and you leave, that it's just like unicorns and butterflies. Yeah. And it's wonderful. There's a whole undoing and a whole path that starts to unravel when you do choose yourself. But like you said, you're just in that space where you're in, what do I need in this moment? And in this moment, and the universe always provides. So I think that that's just, it's really beautiful that you shared that, because I think it's going to give a lot of women permission.
I hope so. I hope so.
So, well, Annalie, what do you have coming up? I know that you were talking about a big project. Please take a moment to just plug yourself, because you are wonderful. And I want people to be able to find you and get involved in what you've got going on. So just take a moment to talk about what you have coming up.
Thank you so much. So I don't really know if I'm supposed to talk about this or not, but I'm kind of in a bit of I'm quite a maverick person, but I'm writing at the moment. I have a publishing deal. So it's a book about female shame. I won't say what it's called. But yeah, it will be out next year, 2025, probably spring 2025. And it is extraordinary. It's my story. Lots of my different stories. It's survivors' stories, my clients, whether it's sexual assault, disordered eating, most horrible girl shaming, frenemy situations that all of us can resonate with when you're humiliated, and how that led to, career and burnout because it was money shaming. Then I've got expert interview in there as well about everything. So this, where shame shows up in our lives as women, and basically the lies that it's told us about how we have to limit ourselves and limit our life. And I'm so excited to bring it into the light. It's just amazing. And I've learned so much. And as you sort of from this conversation, you probably hear there's been a lot of my own unraveling kind of coming through, which has been really beautiful actually as well. So that is taking up the majority of my time. And then I'll be in the States in the fall, doing some big filming projects in Dallas, and then probably some stuff in Austin, up through Miami and New York again, and maybe tying some events too.
I love it so much. And where can people find you? Where's your main channel?
Thank you. My main channel is Instagram, and it's at AnnalieHowling.com. And obviously we're connected there. I have a TikTok, but I am too old to use that. So my lovely Gen Z assistant does that. And then I've got Annalie Howling at YouTube, where actually there's a free inner critic masterclass that any of your listeners can do. It's 40 minutes. It's like meeting your inner critic. It's understanding it. And there's also a free self-love workshop on there. I wanted people to have some tools that they can just do anytime because there's a moment that you need it, which is usually 1 a.m. and I wanted someone to have it.
I love it so much. We'll make sure that we link all of that in the show notes below so that you guys can take advantage of it. Last question for you, Annalie. I ask it to every single person, every guest that I have on the Align Love podcast. What does it mean to you to be in an aligned relationship? It can be with yourself. It can be with a significant partner. What does it mean to feel aligned in the context of a relationship to you?
To be at peace. If I'm in alignment, I'm at peace and in flow.
Love it so much. Annalie, thank you so much for sharing your heart and being so vulnerable and being in integrity on this podcast. I'm going to have you on again soon when the book comes out, because we're going to need to hear.
Let's do a read. Let's do a read through. Let's get people on. I'd love that. I'd love it.
Love it so much. Thank you so much for sharing your heart, and we'll talk to you soon.
That wraps up today's episode of the Aligned Love podcast. One thing that would really help me and the other new potential listeners is for you to rate this show and leave a comment wherever you tune in and listen. Also, make sure to link up with me on Instagram at Lauren Zoller, and please share this podcast with anyone who you think may enjoy it. Until next episode, remember, every transformation begins with one moment of awareness, and I hope today has been yours. I'll see you next time.